Thank you, President Hughes, and thanks for that comprehensive presentation. I believe you touched upon many of the questions that committee members discussed prior to the hearing, but I'm sure there are more, so I will open it up to the committee. Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Chairman. Madam President, do you have a teacher program at CCRI?
We have, thank you for the question, Representative. We have a Department of Human Services, and we have a Pathways program at the college. So students that come to CCRI that know they want to go on to earn their teaching degree at RIC or URI would come in through that educational pathway. They'd be part of the Department of Human Services, and we've long had really solid transfer pathways to both Rhode Island College and URI. I know that President Sanchez spoke earlier about our, I think, deeply held shared desire to continue to improve how we are able to transfer our students to Rhode Island College. So I hope that that answers your question.
Well, you are aware of the Right to Read Act, correct?
Yes.
Passed in 2019. So what is CCRI doing to ensure that teachers who go on to RIC or URI or any other college they choose, when they graduate, they are able to identify and help the students who are identified as for dyslexia?
So thank you for the question. And in general, and I would definitely need to get back to you with a more detailed, comprehensive answer. When I think about the training that our students get at the college in their first 2 years, that tends to be the foundation that they use to set themselves up to then go on to transfer at a 4-year school. And it is my understanding that the obviously very crucial training that you're talking about is going to take place, I think, most robustly as they are going on to complete that bachelor's degree. But I'd be happy to come back to you, of course, with a more comprehensive answer about precisely what the college is doing there.
Thank you. Thank you. I do have a few more, Chairman, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
CCRI, let's circle back. You mentioned renegotiation of vendor contracts?
Yes.
You have a contract with New England Security for monitoring services at your campuses. Is that correct?
Honestly, Representative, I would need someone else to help me answer this question effectively, but let me listen and I will make sure we will get an answer back to you.
All right. So according to the information I have, you have a contract with New England Security monitoring system. It monitors your campuses. One of the campuses, obviously, is Lincoln. Right? You have 24/7 security. For police security, for CCRI security. So you have a 11 to 7 a.m. shift. Your main building has an alarm system, a monitoring system. Because you have security in the building, it hasn't been turned on in like years. So why are we paying this company to do a monitoring service that they're never doing because you have security inside the building at the main building at CCRI? So why both is my question, and why do you have something you never use?
Thank you for the question, and we will get to the bottom of it and come back to you in the committee.
Thank you. Next question, CCI police force. All right?
Yes.
How many officers do you have?
Oh gosh, I cannot tell you that exact number, Representative. I apologize.
All right. How many women do you have on the police force?
I don't know the answer to that either. Not very many.
How many minorities do you have on the police force?
We need to diversify our force for sure.
All right. And would it surprise you to learn that there's only one female officer at CCRI?
No.
Would it surprise you to learn there's only one minority officer at CCRI?
No.
How long have you been president?
5 years.
5 years. Well, over those 5 years, how many officers have been hired?
Again, I would want to come back to make sure I got the information accurately. What I can offer is that we have Chief Sean Collins is the head of our campus police. We absolutely know how important it is to diversify our college police and certainly to diversify our entire workforce. That is a central priority that I care deeply about and have put front and center. We are making progress in certain areas of the college. You are absolutely right, Representative. We need to do better all the way across the college, and we certainly need to do better in campus police. What I can offer is, Chief Collins led the community policing division as a retired officer. When he was an officer in the Warwick Police Department, he has brought that model here. He is working hard to have our college police accredited, and I think believes, as I do, as do his colleagues on the force, that it's absolutely critical that we diversify. So it's you have identified an area where we need to improve. I agree, and we'll certainly give you we'll get back. We will send back to your office and to the committee the more specific numbers.
So would it surprise you to learn that over 10 officers have been hired in the past 5 years?
No.
So I just want to leave this with this. Why haven't, and 10 hires, you couldn't find one female or a minority officer to do this job? I mean, I just have a problem
Representative, I absolutely want to do better here, and we are working hard to do that. And I appreciate your feedback is dead on, and I'm hearing you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Ella Wilkerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. President Hughes, thank you for being here this evening. I have a couple of questions for you. I'd like to start off talking to you about the bookstore. I received an email from a constituent within the last couple of days, and I haven't been able to verify the information that she provided to me. So I'm going to just ask it to you as she presented it to me. And then you can either dispute it and set me straight or confirm it. And of course, we'll both be unhappy with that. So I was told that during the pandemic, of course, the students were required to use ebooks while they were engaged in distance learning, and that some of the ebooks can go up to about $150 in cost per book. And unfortunately, the student is not allowed to keep access to the subscription to the book once the semester is over. Is that correct?
Look, I don't know the answer to that, but if she's asserting that, that sounds correct.
Okay, so then if you could have someone from your staff verify that and get back to me. My concern is that if you have students that are looking at transferring from CCRI to URI or to Rhode Island College, and they're taking their core curriculum at CCRI, it would make sense that they would want access to the books when they continue. Now, I understand it's an ebook situation, but to stop the student from having access to the information at the end of the semester seems counterintuitive to me. So if you could just have someone look into that and explain to me why that is. I mean, I suppose that's how the contract was written for for whoever is providing the books for the students.
That's right, and yes, we will absolutely come back to your office with that.
And then is it also true that at the beginning of the term, the students are given about $600 to $650 for the purchase of their books, and they're required to buy the ebooks and all supplies that they would need through the school bookstore, that they don't have the opportunity to try to shop it around and see where else they may be able to get the books at a lower cost?
So in terms of the way that funding works, in terms of the support, the financial support we make available to the students, I would really want to make sure we got that right. So I'm apologize that I do not have that detailed information about the bookstore. We will absolutely follow up with you and share what the practice is and why.
I would appreciate that. Thank you. Now I'd like to switch directions and talk to you a little bit about CNH certification training. So one of the problems that we're having with the nursing homes statewide is a lack of employees, and in particular of CNAs and nurses. And I was wondering what the enrollment looks like for CCRI for those two areas, both CNA certification and for nursing.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Healthcare obviously is something we take very seriously at the college. We train more healthcare workers than any other college in this state. Again, I would want to come back to you with specific numbers. What I can offer, though, in my earlier remarks, I talked about that concept of increasingly building credentials that are stackable, so that is our students, the majority of whom are working while they're going to college, that they can have a credential of value to put to use in the labor market right away. And a change that we are making at the college is for our students, our nursing students, they will actually complete their CNA training as part of their degree. And we're hopeful that will contribute to meeting the shortage that you're referencing. And certainly when we think about our focus on supporting Rhode Island to recover from this pandemic, our workers, our commencement speaker this year is a CCRI nursing student. I advise students that are working on the front line, many of them as CNAs, and we really understand why it's so important for Rhode Islanders, for families who have family members in those kind of nursing facilities to know that their loved ones are being well cared for. One of the best parts of my job is the emails that I get, not a week goes by, from Rhode Island families who have had their family members taken care of by CCRI healthcare students. Nothing makes me happier to get those. I share your focus on making sure that the college plays an important role in training both CNAs and other healthcare workers.
Excellent, thank you. Now, a lot of our seniors are also opting to age at home. So my question with regards to CNA courses, why wouldn't you allow an individual who was a political science major to take an elective, which was a CNA class, if they if they have an elderly family member that they want to be able to care for at home? Because it's my understanding that you could only take CNA classes if you're on a CNA track, and same thing with the nursing classes. Is there any opportunity for just a regular person, a humanities major, a math major, whoever, to take courses without an actual CNA certificate because they want the ability to use those skills for a loved one at home?
So, Representative, I was a history major, so I love your question. And my great-grandmother was a nurse, so I'm picturing me trying to take care of her. I'm not sure how well that would have gone. I actually really like this idea and want to make sure I don't get over my skis, because this is something that for sure our healthcare deans and the faculty are frankly the more intelligent group for you to be talking to. But I love the idea, and please allow me just to bring it back to the experts in academic affairs and see what they think.
That's excellent, and I would love to continue that conversation. Okay, now I have a question with regards to the Veteran Corps Navigators Program. And I saw that CCRI in Warwick launched their student support for the Vet Corps, I think it was back in April. And I believe the number that was quoted was 500 veteran affiliates from CCRI. My question to you is that 500 throughout all of the CCRI campuses or 500 for the Warwick campus alone? That seems like a really high number.
You're right. So the CCRI serves the highest number of veterans of any higher education institution in the state. And I know the number, depending on the year, is somewhere between 400 and 500. So it sounds like you have the right number. And you're right, that's for all 4 of our campuses. One of my advisees this year is a veteran, and he's going to college with his daughter, which has been hilarious to watch because I have my own children and it's his daughter who's helped him convert to virtual learning. I know what your passion is for serving veterans. I know you are a veteran, and that work at the college is becoming just central to how we do our work. Our veterans have been invaluable in the classroom. I watched this particular advisee coach my younger advisees on how to show up and how to ask for help. And I can't adequately communicate how valuable having a strong veteran presence on our campuses is. It's one of the best things about CCRI.
Has the Navigators program replaced the Veteran Services Office?
No. Now, if there's semantics here, please let me make sure I get them right. But no, that office is up and running and functioning and is part of our Student Services division.
So how did you come to decide to put the Navigators program at Warwick as opposed to the Newport campus?
So it's a good question, and if there's a reason to rethink that, of course we would want to hear that feedback. If I were conjecturing, it would be because the Warwick campus is, by a significant measure, our largest campus, and Newport is our smallest campus.
Okay. And then my last question has to do with the URI Cannabis Study Certificate Program. I was wondering if there's anything on the horizon for CCRI that would also fall under cannabis studies. And then the student would have the ability to continue on with the 4-year degree at URI in the same discipline.
So I listened to your conversation with President Dooley. I will tell you that you're putting it on our horizon. I was listening to that exchange. We don't have anything in the works right now, and based on what I listened to from President Dooley, it sounds like an opportunity we should be considering and figuring out a way that we can prepare students to transfer there for that program.
I hope that you do, because given what it looks like is going to happen at the state level with the increase in adult use cannabis as well as the increase in medical cannabis, we're looking at extremely high-paying jobs. So I'd hate to see our students be closed out of this possibility, and as a result, the compassion centers and the growing centers importing people from other states. That's not a good way to do business, and certainly not a good way to prepare our students to do business.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Chairman. I'm done.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Barros.
Thank you, Chairman. President Hughes, I'm just going to be following up on Rep. Wilkerson's questions and also Rep. O'Brien's questions. You are an institution of higher learning that sort of pride itself on helping low-income and people of color, and I'm rather disappointed that you do not have any of that information, or that information is not that important to you to be able to have that, because it is extremely important since you pride yourself on being that kind of institution.
Thank you, Representative Barros. I don't have the specific information about our police force. I do know, and again, we'd be happy, we would love to follow up with you and with the committee about the progress we're making in diversifying our overall employee base. We are making progress. It's not quick enough for any of us, but as the overall college population, we are making encouraging progress, both with our faculty and with our staff. I think the police department is crucial, and I take that feedback, and we need to do better. I know I would be benefiting from having Chief Collins as part of this conversation, not having trained in that sector myself professionally. I don't have the broader lens for what it actually takes to recruit both women and BIPOC candidates into our workforce. What I do know certainly is those candidates are very appealing. And I know that anytime we are going through a recruiting process, we are competing with other organizations who are looking for the very same thing. None of that is intended to suggest that I think we shouldn't be focused on diversifying our police force.
The police force part is not necessarily what I was actually alluding to. That's just a small piece, because if that's not that important, and apparently you've been there for 5 years, what does the faculty look like?
Yep, our faculty when I arrived was a predominantly white faculty. That remains true. When I look at the 3 full-time hires that we have made for faculty in the last year, 2 of those 3 hires represent themselves as coming from underrepresented groups. So we are focusing on addressing this. It can take time to make it happen. We've seen, I think, even more encouraging progress with our staff. And again, we have that report, and I would be very grateful to share it with you and with the whole committee. We have built a human resources department over the last several years that includes a focus on diverse recruiting, both for our faculty and for our staff. We have put in an entirely new process into place for how we work with our search committees for both recruiting, interviewing, and then making offers to these candidates. When I look at our peers nationally, one of the difficult truths that I've learned is this work rarely happens overnight, and so we continue to work closely with our faculty and with our staff so that sort of everyone is together and rowing in the same direction about the importance of building a college that more accurately reflects the students that we teach and that we serve today.
Now, just to go back to my original point, and that is when you came to us, you certainly sold us on the idea that, your institution is one of the institutions that takes care of those that are left behind. And they're left behind, and yet they're not adequately represented on your faculty. But that's just a statement. So I'll just take it, and I hope that within the next 5 years, that things would look considerably different. Because I don't think it should take that long for change to come. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any other questions from the committee? Representative Ella Wilkerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. President Hughes, actually, I do have one more question, and it's a follow-up to what my brother was asking you about regarding diversity hirings at CCRI. So I know that in June of last year that you hired an assistant director for HR, affirmative action, equal opportunity, diversity, and Title IX coordinator, Ms. Sheila Wall. So how often is she providing you with updates? And, what kind of affirmative action plan has she put together for the CCRI and its campuses?
So Sheila is part of that work, along with our head of HR, Sybil Bailey, and along with another employee in HR who is specifically focused on what you both are talking to me about. So the just intentional outreach and recruiting. I think what I would like to offer, and perhaps haven't adequately communicated, is we are diversifying our faculty and staff, and we have made gains. And I simply didn't want to suggest that we think it's good enough or that we're done. But we have made meaningful gains in diversifying both our faculty and our staff. I meet every single week with our head of HR. Sheila reports into her. I meet every 2 weeks with the woman that has been overseeing our DEI work. I meet with our DEI council every month. And so it is central. It's central to my desk and to my office. And I regret if I've suggested otherwise.
Well, no, first of all, I don't get the impression that you indicated that you were done. I don't think any of us in state government would say that where we are, in quote unquote, done in terms of hiring qualified diversity candidates. But I do want to emphasize that we have a tremendous number of highly qualified, diversified candidates within the four corners of the state of Rhode Island. And I would hope that you or Sheila, and I don't mean to be disrespectful by calling her by her first name, but I would hope that the two of you are not reliant on some of these Dean for Hire subscriptions or hired headhunters, as opposed to looking for people in the state and taking people outside of state, whether or not they have the credentials. And I'm not imputing the credentials of anyone that you may have hired from other states who may still be in their original home state while they're collecting a Rhode Island state paycheck during this pandemic. I want to make sure that Rhode Islanders that live in Rhode Island, not have been imported to Rhode Island, but live in Rhode Island, are getting these jobs and these sought-after diversity jobs. I think it's important for our students to see faculty and staff who look like them. And a community college is the great equalizer, not to say that the other institutions of higher ed are not, but typically in a community college, you're going to see that great cross-section of the state, which is the wealth and beauty of a community college. And as you can tell, the four of us here, of course, I'm going to include our chairman, are very, very passionate with regards to not only community college, but also in achieving greater diversity across the board for our community college and our four-year colleges. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Okay, I think that exhausts the questions from the committee. I just have one, President Hughes, on a little lighter note, but I too was a history major, and after spending 28 years teaching history at East Providence High School, you know what my current employment is, and that's as an athletic administrator. So the question is, you spoke about the CCRI renovation and modernization that will go on regarding the GEO bonds that were approved, and we're all in favor of that. And I know that you had existing work underway and probably still underway in Warwick. When is the anticipated opening of the Cullen Fieldhouse, reopening, I should say, of the Cullen Fieldhouse? As someone who has to schedule a single gymnasium for a multitude of sports, I know how challenging that can be, and I just don't want the athletic experience, and as you know, that's because I know your children are athletes, that's as much of an educational part of development and growth as anything else. When will that field house be back online to support the community college athletics?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We have 13 sports teams, the majority of whom, and I won't have it, it's either 10 or 11, already train and practice at our Lincoln Fieldhouse. We do intend and are excited about holding fall sports after a break brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. As we prepare to undertake that work I talked about earlier, which is the redesign, the transformation of our student services division here at Warwick, we will need to use Van Cullen Fieldhouse for swing space. So a big part of our student services division, we will be setting up temporary offices in the field house in order for that to happen. So during the period that the Warwick Student Services Division is under renovation, we will be holding our, those 13 teams will be training and practicing at the Lincoln Fieldhouse. And again, the majority of them already are there, either 10 or 11 are already there. So it's moving a couple to the Lincoln Fieldhouse.
But the intent is to reopen Cullen at some point.
Yes, as soon as we can get the student services people out and back into the Warwick building, we will reopen the Van Cullen Fieldhouse.
And that's not to diminish the important work that's being done to upgrade and modernize. I have that concern that that gets left out of the mix. President Hughes, thank you very much for your presentation, for answering the committee's questions. We appreciate, as always, you being here. So at this point, we'll move on to the Office of the Post-Secondary Commissioner, and we will welcome for his first appearance before the House Finance Committee Subcommittee on Education, Commissioner Gilkey.
Good evening, and I appreciate the time commitment for this evening's meeting, Chairman Amore, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I also want to thank President Dooley in particular for our recent conversations on Rhode Island. It is my first little over 90 days on the job as the new commissioner, and I appreciate his guidance and advice early on as I made this transition. I want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Cnh Gilkey, and I joined, like I said, on February 1st. I look forward to getting to know all of you better and learning your thoughts on the post-secondary system in Rhode Island. I've spent almost 2 decades studying and working and researching in the fields of education, both in K-12 as an inner-city high school career and technical teacher, and in higher education, as well as in workforce and economic development. While I know that we all share the belief that education is important, I'll let you know my bias up front. I believe that the great equalizer is higher education, and all Rhode Islanders deserve an equitable chance to attain a post-secondary credential that's aligned to our labor market and that one that pays a living wage. As requested by Chairman Amore, I want to take a few minutes to review some of our priorities we have at OPC. First, to say the least, Rhode Island needs a strong post-secondary education system aligned to workforce and training. It is a fact that almost every job in Rhode Island requires some type of degree or credential beyond high school. And as you have witnessed from our institutional presentations today, our state has a lot to be proud of and build upon. And I believe the time is right for higher education to make transformational steps around the country and certainly here in Rhode Island. In fact, after the 2008 recession, nationally, almost all new jobs that were created after the 2008 recession required that credential. And so it's even more important that interlink between our economy and our higher education system. When the pandemic hit Rhode Island's economy the hardest, those that not have some form of a post-secondary credential were on average significantly more likely to be dislocated by that big shift in the economy than those with a credential. It is my view, and shared by leading experts in our field of higher education around the country, that a post-secondary credential is not only a 2-year or 4-year traditional degree that we find at our colleges and universities, but it's also deeply connected to the work of building a workforce that is armed with a high-quality non-degree credential aligned to our local employer needs. These non-degree credentials are critical to create these pathways, stackable pathways that President Hughes mentioned, to earn credentials that permit Rhode Islanders to quickly get into the workforce, but also these short-term credentials to lead to long-term degrees that keep our citizens in those jobs with a living wage. In fact, someone with a 4-year degree, and I think President Sanchez hit on this in his presentation, on average will bring home more than $1 million more over their lifetime than someone with a short-term certificate. So while a short-term certificate gets folks in the economy, a pathway to a 4-year degree keeps them in the economy and lets them earn vastly more over their lifetime. This is even more critical in light of the pandemic because typically citizens in this state and around the country that are traditionally left behind, they get harder when our economy shifts. I grew up in a family that this happened to when an industry shifted and left my community in Kentucky, much like what happened with the textile and the jewelry industry here in Rhode Island, and that will continue to happen over time as technology continues to impact industries across the U.S. and in the Northeast. The pandemic has also created additional barriers for entry into our workforce training and post-secondary degree programs, creating a widening gap for us to close. For example, here in Rhode Island, service sector job losses borne mostly by women and people of color have created an opportunity to reskill workers for the first time for employment in high-wage, in-demand fields that offer those reliable schedules and benefits. But as important as good-paying jobs are, we also know that citizens with some form of a post-secondary credential are more engaged citizens, more likely to vote, to engage in tolerant civic discourse, and to engage in their local community. If I've learned anything over the last few years as an American and as an educator, it's the increased awareness and the burden of responsibility for us as state leaders on how critical our country needs a more tolerant, a more healthy engagement of public discourse. And higher education can be a large part of that pursuit. As commissioner, it is my job to assist you, our governor, the institutions, and our board to achieve this work at scale. And on behalf of our taxpayers and their hard-earned investment, this is the public service that I'm committed to help guide the state's interests in a robust system of higher education. And with its close link to our economy and the economic impact of the pandemic, now more than ever, we need a coordinated, strategic approach to higher education, aligned with the Rhode Island economy, whether it's in biomedicine or healthcare or IT or advanced manufacturing across all of our institutions. That's just one of our priorities. For every Rhode Islander, I want nothing more than I wish for my own children, a post-secondary education that provides them with a purposeful, fulfilled life that contributes to our economy, one that's valued with a livable, sustainable wage. And the facts are clear. Post-secondary education for all Rhode Islanders and our own children continues to be the best means to that end. And this is our second priority at OPC, to ensure that our institutions are reaching as many Rhode Islanders as possible. And that work has already begun, working closely with all 39 communities in the state. As a newcomer, over a little 90 days in the position, like I mentioned, and as a commissioner, I can say that OPC and the Rhode Island Council on Post-Secondary Education is well positioned to not only use its statutory responsibility that include creating policy, working directly with CCRI and RIC, but to steer the state's focus on education attainment aligned to the economy forward. Rhode Island has a post-secondary goal. 70% of our citizens have some form of post-secondary credential, short-term, 2-year, or 4-year by 2025, a goal that I inherited as the new commissioner on February 1st. If we're going to meet this goal as a state, we must focus on meeting those that are underserved, where they are, and align our efforts to the Rhode Island economy. Post-secondary credentials should lead to real jobs. To this end, our office must live up to those statutory responsibilities, sure, by creating that policy, approving proprietary schools, reviewing RIC and CCRI and our higher education budget, approving programs as needed. But in addition to these responsibilities, our office should be providing a service model approach to steering the state's invested interest in post-secondary education. A service model that works in addition to helping the General Assembly and the governor, but also working with our local communities, business and industry across all of our institutions to ensure that Rhode Island not only recovers from this past year, but positions itself to compete on the national and the global stage. To date, I've met with over half of our local municipality leaders, and I'm committed to meeting with all 39 Rhode Island community leaders to talk about education attainment on local terms. In fact, our staff in our first 90 days localized education attainment data for all 39 communities and I'm presenting that data with each of our community members. As of today, I met with two, but moving with more next week. To wrap up, I want to highlight just a few of the body's work that are underway at OPC, and I want to thank the committee and the General Assembly for our continued support. We appreciate the House's continued support of dual concurrent enrollment. Participation in this initiative continues to grow since it started over 6 years ago. With this current school year, over 9,000 Rhode Island students participated. And a recent study looking at Rhode Island specific data showed that students are more likely to enroll and then graduate from college if they participate in dual concurrent enrollment with high school. Our education centers is another space where OPC is providing services to the state in close collaboration with business and industry and our institutions. Rhode Island has two of these, the Westerly Education Center and the Rhode Island Nursing Center, that are in operation. And thanks to the support of this body, and I saw that in the budget presentation, in 2020, we were approved to launch a third center in northern Rhode Island, and we're on track to open that up in late 2021. As you are aware, the centers work with a variety of higher education providers and industry partners like Electric Boat in the design and the delivery of workforce training, post-secondary courses, and GED preparation. Both centers stayed in operation throughout the pandemic, following the Rhode Island Department of Health guidelines, and the nursing center served over 600 students. Westerly was able to continue to offer several different trainings over the last year and help almost 1,000 Rhode Islanders dislocated by the pandemic get back to work. And I invite you to come with me when you have time to tour this self-sustaining center, in addition to the additional site in northern Rhode Island to show you how these centers are making a difference. In the spring of 2020, OPC launched the Rhode Island Reconnect portal, a site that connects adults looking to upskill at a college or a university or in a post-secondary training program with one-on-one coaching. Because we know a lot of our underserved populations, particularly when they're dislocated by a job, they need that hand-to-hand help to get them in a training program, to get them back into the economy. As a response to the pandemic, we partnered with the Department of Labor and Training to expand the program and connect it to the Back to Work Rhode Island initiative. And in the year since we started it, we coached and supported over 1,400 students and helped them reach their educational goals and training goals during the pandemic. COVID also taught us that when Rhode Island needs a strategic coordinated response to higher ed, both private and public, the Council and OPC are the state's mechanism for that strategy, for the design and for the execution. Over the past year, in addition to that partnership with DLT and supporting the Back to Work participants, OPC coordinated with the Rhode Island Department of Health and the Governor's Office to strategically coordinate the higher ed response to the pandemic, including contact tracing, testing, and now we're focused on vaccination policy. While the pandemic will pass, Rhode Island's going to need an even greater level of coordination to ensure the state and federal investment in higher education is properly guided toward economic recovery. And while this organization has done some incredible work, our agency can and should do more. It can help steer our return on investment for the state's education system. And in the 3 months since I've started leading the organization, I've worked to refocus and have an agenda, as I started to mention above, to better serve the public's interests in post-secondary education, and really believe that it's connected to our future economy. I'm going to thank you for our opportunity to talk this evening. I'm happy to take any questions and look forward to working with you in the future.
Commissioner, thank you. And again, welcome and best of luck. Are there any questions from the members? Okay, I do have one, Commissioner. You mentioned the Northern Rhode Island Education Center due to open in the fall of 21. State law limits, 50% of the funds can come from the state. Are we on track for the other 50% of those funds in regard to the opening of the Northern Rhode Island Education Center?
Yes, to my understanding, we are on track. We've had commitments in for that center, just like we have with the Royce Family Foundation at Westerly Education Center. So those are on track to be sustained, just like our other operation.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, Commissioner, we will forward any other questions from the committee to you. Again, we appreciate your presentation and you introducing yourself to the committee and to the state as a whole. So have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, next we will go to the K-12 budget. And at this time, we'll call on Commissioner Infante Green to present for the Rhode Island Department of Education. Commissioner, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Honorable members of the House Committee of Finance and Subcommittee on Education, thank you, Chair Greg Amore, for having us today. I say us because my team is here. We're ready to answer questions. But it's a pleasure to be here to speak about RIDE's budget priorities for the upcoming fiscal year and detail some of the critical work that we have done recently for students in Rhode Island, particularly during COVID-19. From the moment we made the decision to close in March 2020, it's been clear to us that the pandemic was going to have some deep disruptions for our students. In light of the unprecedented circumstances, we got to work immediately over the summer to make sure that we were ready. We knew that there was going to be no RICAS exam, so we needed data. We needed to know where our kids were. So what we did was that we created interim assessments, we put out RFPs for interim assessments for all the districts. We had a summer school program sale that served over 14,000 students and provided learning opportunities for our students that we hope would provide some of the learning that they missed or lost. But this is the first time that RIDE has ever run a summer school program. That has never happened from the district level. So we're pretty proud of that work, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So Rhode Island rolled out a virtual learning faster than most other states. We did it in a week. We had already been seeing the writing on the wall since we were one of the states that had the first case. Our first case was a K-12 case. As you know now, that happened in a private school, but we were sharing the buses. So it impacted us very, very deeply. So what we had to do at RIDE is work in ways that we had never worked before, meaning that we ended up working with private schools, parochial schools, charter schools, everyone under the sun, so that we could be successful with COVID-19. So as we resolved to return to school, one of the things that we knew that we had to do was really be aggressive about what we were going to do with our engagement for our students, and coming back in person was extremely important for us because we know that it isn't just the academics, but the social emotional piece. There's nothing like in-person learning, and we all know that. So we were very clear about metrics. If you recall early on, we had metrics for every municipality so that we can begin. In August 13th, we made the decision to look at the numbers and take on the challenge to start in September. So we developed our plans, open communication back and forth with every local leader in the state. We provided templates, set standards for these state plans for distance, in-person, hybrid, and encourage schools to lead. So what we did is we reorganized ourselves at RIDE so there would be a point of contact for every single district during this time period so that we can help support. Last year I mentioned that we were shifting from just solely compliance to compliance and support, and that's what we are. Then the next step that we took, we understood that this was much bigger than just what the districts could do or RIDE. We partnered with the National Guard and Rhode, and we created the Educational Operations Center. It's the only one in the nation. It's a single point of contact, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for support to educators. Resources, training, track real-time data on positive cases in schools, delivered crucial supplies like personal protective equipment to all our classrooms, tested out the HEPA filters, brought in experts that helped us craft the playbook that is being used throughout the state. So even though this wasn't easy, we worked really hard for our kids to be prepared to start school September 13th, while most of the nation did not. So during this time, we Rhode Islanders have actually shown the rest of the nation what we can do. We closed quickly, we opened quickly, and we've had a lot of success. In many places, many states did not really reach the connectivity divide, the technology divide. We were not one of those states. We actually were able to secure a device for every single student, as well as internet access. That was not easy for us to do. But as you know, with technology, we have to keep updating. So our prime objective was to bring kids back to school and have students and educators be safe. So we've created all the tools and supports to be able to provide a high quality education for our students. We know that accurate data is essential to measuring the impact of the pandemic, so we used 2 interim assessments that I spoke about earlier. We had an assessment in October that districts used, and then one mid-year in January, so we can get a full picture of where our kids are, where the impact has taken place. I know that many people thought that it would be in high school, but our data has shown that it's really been in the earlier grades, particularly in math. And that makes sense because we were, struggling a little in math pre-pandemic. So we wanted to know where our kids were. Everybody was talking about the learning loss, but there was no way to actually measure it. So we put this in place. So we were being proactive about that. So we know that all our kids have had setbacks. But for our the setbacks are more pronounced in our most vulnerable groups and populations. So we know that when we were looking at what we were going to do as we move forward, we had to really look closely at what our needs are in Rhode Island. Another challenge that we saw in Rhode Island was the enrollment has dropped significantly with our pre-K and K students. And elementary school students were lagging behind than in a typical year. But the early learning years are crucial for the career of our students. So we saw that big gap in those grades, in the earlier grades. Parents decided to keep their kids home, homeschooled, had pods. So a whole host of things that we felt a little bit of that. Our data also shows that students typically marginalized by education systems like Black and Latino, differently abled students, students living in poverty, were drastically more absent this year than in the past. These are communities that were impacted by COVID personally. So we saw a lot of the students not be present as much as we would like them to have been. So the assessments have told us that we have to really look at what the solution is in Rhode Island and have it be community-based. So we convened a task force of educational experts, community leaders, local educators, school administrators, and we called it the Learning Equity and Accelerated Pathways Task Force, LEAP. So for the last 2 months, the task force met for about 7 sessions to have guided discussions on issues created by the pandemic. But the root inequities that have existed in our school system was something that we also tackled. Because we talk about maybe a student in a particular district having a 6-month gap, but now because of the pandemic, but we had kids that were 2 and 3 years behind pre-pandemic. So what does that look like for those students? I have to share that just this week, I was on a national panel with Rhode Island, was lauded for beginning this work ahead of other states, and now rushing to launch similar efforts of accelerated learning that are centered around the community data driven. So for us, it was really important to include our data. So last week, the task force issued its report to us, and there were some major findings or recommendations. Energizing our school communities, students, and educators by launching a back-to-school campaign and statewide toolkit with attention to students that are chronically absent and have experienced some sort of really a big gap, and provide opportunities for our youth. Ensure all students have access to high quality and personalized support from adults, both during the school day and through extended learning partnerships before and after school or summer learning opportunities. Universal screening for all students and aligning resources to need. Improving and supporting student transitions across grades and systems, and closing the digital divide for students in our state. I said that we closed it in terms of devices, but there are places where the Wi-Fi is not great, it's not stable, and we have to continuously update our technology. So as we move on, we launched our Summer Academy last year for the first time. That I mentioned, the state had never done that before. And our students signed up for virtual, and there were some in-person opportunities. And this year, we wanted to build on the success of that program. And one of the things that was really important for us was to have wider programming that would include career and technical educational opportunities, both virtual and in-person classes. And it's all under our system, enrollri.org, our centralized hub that will help us to reduce opportunity gaps by allowing our students to sign up for enriching learning opportunities across the state, so that you can choose from programs that best fit them instead of what's in their neighborhood. So there's multiple opportunities. And what's exciting about that is that last summer when we launched it, we saw about a 50-point gain on the SAT and math for students that were on grade level, and for students that were behind, we saw about a 100-point gain on math. So we know that this works. And that's what we wanted to really make sure, is that we don't do more of the same, but that we institute things that actually have results for students. So in the fall, we prepared to hit the ground running, perhaps better than any other state. The majority of school districts of our school districts are fully in person now, including over 90% of our public middle and elementary schools. Based on the survey that we conducted during the break, no LEA private school at elementary, middle, or high is fully distanced. So I think we're in a good place as a state. There's still more work to be done, but compared to other states, we really took on this challenge and pushed forward. So we are heavily focused on the screening process that will help identify the students most impacted by the pandemic and help them not only catch up, but leap forward. As we all know that prior to the pandemic, we were not in a great place in education. So we don't want to return to pre-pandemic. We want to do better for our families and our students because they deserve it. So what we want to make sure is that we innovate and don't do more of the same. And what we're not going to do is remediation. We're going to provide different types of opportunities. So I also want to take the time to share some incredible news on the leading work Rhode Island is doing. Our state has dramatically improved both participation and performance in AP classes over the last 10 years. Rhode Island has the largest improvement in AP pass rates of any state in the country over the last 10 years. However, we have a pass rate now higher than the national average for the first time. That happened this year. The class of 2010 has a pass rate of 10.8%. The class of 2020 has a pass rate of 25.2%. That's pretty impressive. We also have more than doubled the percentage of students taking AP exams. We went from 18% 10 years ago to 41% of graduating seniors. Our participation now is higher than the national average. So we have a lot to be proud of here in Rhode Island. One of the U.S. Department of Education's regional educational laboratories recently conducted a rigorous research study on the impact of Rhode Island's AP dual enrollment and concurrent enrollment courses. The study compared Rhode Island students who took college-level courses to similar students who did not take the courses and found that the course takers graduated at higher rates, enrolled in college at higher rates, were more college ready with a fewer lower rates needing developmental education in college. So I think that this is why our summer program is so important for us, as well as the ACN work that we're doing, is that we want to give all the students the ability to have those results. If similar students didn't have those opportunities and we can see them move forward, that's the responsibility that we have taken on as RIDE, as a state agency. We're proud that Enrollri, our new one-stop shop for kids in enrollment and dual enrollment, concurrent courses, even though those numbers have been dropping nationally, that's not the case here in Rhode Island. We're also, I know this is exciting, We're also in the process of revisiting Rhode Island's social studies standards, which includes civics. I know that we've been having this conversation. So we've already started that process. That's why you see in our budget request a social studies specialist. Since the day I arrived here, I've been asking for that position. We think as an organization, and I think personally, that it's really crucial for us to carry out this work. We're going to do it anyway. However, if we have a social studies specialist, this would cut down our time significantly, at least by 6 months, to be able to update, revise the standards. So that is really important. Amongst the other FTEs, a communications manager to help with outreach for families and stakeholders, and a transformation specialist to support school systems in closing statewide equity gaps for our multilingual learners and our differently able students. So I think due to the accountability and site-based management legislation, there's a fundamental change to how Rhode supports and holds school systems accountable for student outcomes. So we want to really do that work, and we need the extra support to do it in a manner that would make all of you proud. With regard to civics, Regulation 16-22-30, Rhode has been engaged in the process of revising existing grade span expectations in social studies, with a few particular emphasis in highlighting the legislation, including instilling a respect for cultural, ethnic, and racial diversity in Rhode Island, and for the contributions made by diverse cultural, ethnic, and racial groups to the life and state, being designed to avoid perpetuating gender, cultural, ethnic, or racial stereotypes, and enhancing civic mindedness and engagement. So this is where we're going. We've been doing the work, and we will have something ready by the first cut of it by the summer, by July 2021. So Rhode formed the Rhode Island History and Social Studies Advisory Committee to review the current grade span expectations, recommend revisions, and has been working in collaboration to develop a framework for the standards and revisions process. Rhode requested assistance from the Region 2 Comprehensive Center, and the RISAC sought input from stakeholders for suggestions on what to include in the social studies standards and curriculum framework. We have developed a draft framework and a multi-layered process for revision that are in the early stages. As you can see, we have ambitious plans for the future and have undertaken some important work in the wake of the public health crisis. As states across the nation, we stand now at a crossroads for the future education in Rhode Island. We can rebuild our education system as it was before, which we are not going to do, knowing that there are cracks in the foundation in which our most vulnerable students' futures disappear. Or we can rise to the challenge before us and create a new, better system. So we have made that decision. We're going to move forward, we're going to innovate, and we're going to push so that our students have all the opportunities they need to succeed. I look forward to collaborating with you, making sure that we implement, that we support districts to be successful, and that we're able to partner with everyone that finds education to be the most important issue. And I know that it's everyone that is watching today and participating. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to ask the first few questions, then I'm going to turn the hearing over to Chairman Barros for a little while. Could you just go into more detail on two of the FTEs, the transformation specialist and the communication specialist? I mean, I don't know who in their right mind would be against the social studies specialist, so we won't deal with that one. But just go into a little more detail as to what the role of the transformation specialist and the communication specialist is.
Sure. So I'll do the communication specialist. For us is extremely important because, as you saw in the recommendations, we need this campaign and we need to work with parents, communicate with parents. So we have struggled, right? Because we're a state agency and the information goes out to the superintendents, then the districts, and then it goes out to the districts and the teachers, then the parents. So we need someone that can really communicate with the parents, one, the importance of us going back to school, making sure that students attend summer school, but that we have someone that is really, that is their sole job, is that they're communicating and working with the community. We don't have that at Ride. So that's really important. If this is what we say we're going to do, we want to make sure that we are pushing in that direction and that we're putting all our efforts in there. The second position, the transformation, I have Kelvin Rodan, our Deputy Commissioner, who can talk to you about the specifics because we're moving in a very different direction. We've met with East Providence, we've met with different districts to really look at what accountability would look like and how we can be supportive. So Kelvin, do you want to talk a little bit about that position?
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Kelvin, we can't hear you. We can see you, Kelvin, but we cannot hear you. I don't know if you're...
How about now? Can you?
We can hear you slightly. Okay.
All right, so I'll talk about the Okay, so why don't you?
Yeah, we still don't have a good audio on you, Kelvin. You know what? We'll come back to you. Let me transition to, and we will come back to you. Let's transition to Representative Barrows, who I know has a few questions and who will chair the hearing for a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Commissioner, are you there?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
No, I had not asked it. We were just waiting for the deputy to come on. But so we.
So I will. He's having trouble with his computer, but this is a position to really focus on our multilingual learners and our differently abled students within the district and the accountability system to support the districts.
Okay. Now, I have a couple of questions, Commissioner. You said in the closing of your presentation, you said we have a new, better system. So could you talk a little bit more what that better system looks like?
So we're in the process of building that system. So as you know, we're going to get a lot of federal funding. So what we've created is what that structure will look like, and districts will have to prepare and work with their communities, not just with the teachers and the principals, but also with the parents, the CBOs, and the community to provide what kids need to be able to move to the next level. So that's the system that I was referring to, is that we have a chance to innovate, and we're gonna really do amazing things. But we really have to work locally so that all the plans are created. What we're creating is the framework of what needs to be in those plans. And the most vulnerable populations have to be front and center. Usually what we do is we sort of add them at the end, and that's not what we want to do. We want to lead with those populations.
Okay. Now, I don't know if you heard Liza's presentation, on the booklet that we were given, there is 22 charter schools and two state schools. In those 22 charter schools, how many students are represented there?
How many in total?
Well, I think it's about 6% of the population.
So we have a number like
About 10,000 students.
You think about 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
And it also says there are two new pending charter schools pending approval. And who are
Yes.
they?
Which are the schools pending approval?
Yeah, it says there's two new charter school pending approval.
So it's Nuestro Mundo and PVD Prep. And Excel.
So, I mean, are we saying they're already in the pipelines, or they're going through the process of being approved?
No, they're in the pipeline. They're going through the process of being approved. They had to meet a couple of things, and they have met them at this moment, they have met those requirements.
Okay. I have a few questions, but I don't know if my
Sure.
colleagues here you have a question, Billy? Rep. O'Brien has a couple of questions, Commissioner.
Sure.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, what is the total amount of money being transferred from public school districts to charter schools this year? Total amount, please.
The total amount, there's no amount being transferred. They're all public schools. So if you're talking about the money follows the child. So that's however many students they have in their school, that's the money that follows them.
How much money is going to the 22 charter schools this year?
How much money is going to 20?
Can you guys hear me?
We'll get back to you. Mark, can you answer that?
Can you guys hear me? I'm trying to.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. There's about $118 million that goes to the charters from the funding formula.
118 million. So how much from North Providence? That should have gone to North Providence.
I'll have to get back to you with that.
So over a 10-year period, is that going to increase?
Well, it'll depend on if any students from North Providence additionally choose a charter.
So
And as the funding formula increases, it'll increase.
So I'm talking about statewide. So it is going to increase over the next 10 years. Is that what you're saying? Right
Well,
now. Statewide.
The total amount of the state aid doesn't increase. It's the same amount of aid. As you pointed out, though, it's money that would be going to a municipality now is going to a charter school.
Correct.
So
it's
it will
118
increase every year.
So it's 118 million right now. So it just stays the same. That's over $1 billion over 10 years. Is that correct? Right? It's over $1 billion.
Yeah, yes.
That's correct. All right. All right. Who oversees that money to make sure it's being spent properly for the taxpayers of the state of Rhode Island? It's $1 billion, right? Over the next 10 years, who oversees it? From the state?
Well, they have to put together a plan. So there's a whole fiscal plan that they put together. And at the end of the day, if they're using the money properly, we see it in the results for the students. Because that's what we base it on, is that we see that the students are getting the education that they signed up for.
But who oversees? Because in every school district, in North Providence, we have great success. We have over 100 kids.
There's a report that they put together.
All right.
That-
Who oversees it
comes
to
in.
make sure they're spending the taxpayer money properly? Like we have school boards who oversee it in every school district. Who oversees that money to make sure that money is being spent properly in the state of Rhode Island? Is there any check?
Each school board has, each school has a board that oversees how they spend the money.
Correct. So the taxpayers, the elected representatives have no say in it, like school boards? No one from Rhode has any say in it?
No, we don't have someone from Rhode, it's the school boards.
So the school boards, the local school boards like...
No, the charter boards.
The charter boards. So what you're saying is the local school boards, like North Providence, have no right to oversee how money is being spent on North Providence children?
No, not at this moment.
Not at all.
They have their boards where they make things public and they have their reports that they put together, but no.
So no one from the local government who are elected, no one from the state government who is elected or appointed by elected officials.
No, that's state law. That's what's in the law.
I'm asking a question. It's just a yes or no answer. No one can oversee this except for the board from the charter school. No elected official has anything to do with overseeing these charter schools. Is that correct?
No, by state law, that's the way it was set up.
But so the answer is yes. Thank you.
The charter schools are audited by by independent auditors, and those audit reports are submitted to the Auditor General's office.
So the Auditor General does the Auditor General have the authority to audit them at any time?
I don't know that they do, but they have, by law, they have an annual audit,
All right.
which is submitted to the Auditor General.
So it's submitted.
And to RIDE. We do have
So-
copies of all their audits here.
So they, the charter schools, each one, submit something to you, and we have no oversight to check if it's correct?
We check, maybe the question was, we don't get involved in the appropriation of the funds. Once the funds are spent, we review the audit reports, we do risk assessments for all the schools, including the charter schools, where they complete a survey, and then based upon some risk factors, we'll go out and visit every single school. We visit charters as well as other schools, make sure they're following policies, make sure they're following all the federal guidelines when they spend federal money. And so we do that type of stuff. No one from RIDE will say you should buy this books instead of pencils, or this teacher or that teacher, like maybe a school board might do for a local school district.
Correct.
But the money isn't just totally given out and not accounted for. The money is accounted for after the fact.
And the finances are part of their accountability, and the mayors sit on the mayoral academies. So there's some of those checks and balances.
All right. Now, and the funding formula for charter schools, do you think it's fair for the public school districts? That's a yes or a no?
Do I think it's fair?
Yes.
I don't know how to answer that question. I'm not responsible for creating the funding formula, but what I do think is that
I'm not asking you about
if a
that.
child-
Just, is it fair? That's all I'm asking.
is it fair?
Yeah.
Fair to whom?
I just said the public school districts.
So I think that I don't know. I think that's a question that needs to be answered by somebody that's going to be looking at the funding formula.
Correct.
Right now,
I
the
would-
money follows the child, and that makes sense.
So you believe it's fair then?
I am answering the question by saying that the money follows the child. I don't have an opinion whether it's fair or not.
All right. So the charter schools, North Providence, for example, has 2 students that cost over $100,000 a year to educate. Does the charter schools, any student in any one of the 22 charter schools have a child like that? Where their learning disability costs that charter school over $100,000?
I'm not aware. I can get back to you. We can do that. We can look and then get back to you on that.
So for me, without taking that into account, the money that local school districts have to spend to make sure every child gets a fair and free education in this state, and the charter schools are not taking those kids who are extremely difficult children because of their learning disabilities, is unfair. And therefore, the charter schools funding formula needs to be changed, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Commissioner, I'd like a follow-up question to what Rep. O'Brien was basically saying. So if I'm going to conjecture on this, is that you're saying we're going to have a new and better system, and then meanwhile we're taking money from that system and putting it into a different system. And I think that's what he was referring to as whether that or not is fair.
Well, so you're asking me a very difficult question because they're both public schools. And we oversee, as RIDE, as a state agency, both public schools.
So let me rephrase the question then. The traditional public school versus a charter school. You are telling us right now that you are going to new, better system, and you tell me that it's in the pipeline and it's going to be better than what we have now. But yet we continue, and Rep. O'Brien's calculation is correct. Over a 10-year period, it's going to be $1 billion going to be flowing over to the other side, leaving the traditional public school with less, $1 billion.
Yeah.
So that's why we're saying. I'm sorry.
But, okay, so here's the challenge. We're talking about this $1 billion. Mark, how much do we have in our education system as a whole? Because then we'd have to multiply that for the next 10 years as well, so that we're measuring the same amount.
No,
Right.
I understand.
Well, it's about 900 million, so it's about, be 9 billion to 1 billion, I guess it'd be.
Yeah.
No,
So we're talking about like 1%.
like a 10%.
10%, sorry,
Yeah.
10.
So yeah, no, I think, I just want to get that point clear because it doesn't, to me, as Rep. O'Brien was saying, it doesn't seem fair to us. Yes, I mean, I think your role as the commissioner, you don't represent charter schools, you don't represent, the traditional public schools, you represent all the kids. And I think it's unfair. So if we have 155,000 kids in the traditional public schools, and you have 6,000 or 7,000 kids in the charter school, is it fair to disenfranchise the traditional school, which has the greater amount of kids, so that the more affluent kids could benefit?
So, okay, so there's this idea that it's taking away. I think that the schools are all trying to improve and do a better job. And it's not more affluent kids going to charter schools. Right now, if we look at the number of kids that are in charter schools, they are reflective of the district in terms of free and reduced lunch, in terms of students of color. So I think it's not more affluent or anything.
No, I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean that, because I come from one of those communities, so I know. They're not as affluent, but certainly their skill set level, their ability, their grades are a little bit different than some of the other kids in our traditional public school. But I think we probably can go around this over and over, but I can
Sure,
see...
but can I clarify something? When the kids go in, it's a blind lottery, right? And I'll give you an example. We have 19,000 families applying for like 300 seats. So it's not that the kids with the better scores or whatever are getting in, because we're going in as a blind lottery. So what happens is that after being in the system for a certain amount of time, the kids perform a little differently. So that we're all talking about the same things. I think, I hate that we're pitting ourselves against each other, because at the end of the day, all our school systems are trying to do the best job that they can. And right now, we are in a position where we're going to get a lot of federal funding to support the kids that we currently have in our system. And I think that's where we need to be focusing a lot of our attention, is on what's going to happen from this day moving forward.
So to that end, I'm going to ask one question before I turn it over to my friend Vela Wilkerson. So you do have a discretionary pot of money in your budget. I think it's somewhere around $65 million. What is your intention with that money? Can that money be used to shore up some of the losses that some of these other traditional schools will suffer?
Losses that they'll suffer from COVID? What's happened to COVID?
No, the loss they would suffer from the kids moving to charters.
That's not what that money is for. That money is for us to recuperate from the pandemic academically, social-emotionally. That's what that money is meant for. And the money will go directly to the districts, and that's what the intent of the federal government for that money is, for the learning loss that may or may not have occurred, but definitely the impact of COVID. It is not meant to supplant anything else.
Well, I mean, I have a different view of that, but certainly. Rep, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Commissioner. Thank you for being with us tonight. I just have a couple of questions with regards to COVID and our public schools. So I believe that it was Providence that decided to engage in the school-administered COVID testing. Was that correct? I think Lincoln and there was one other municipality who initially... Central Falls, who had looked at doing the pilot but didn't continue. Is that correct?
No, that's incorrect. So we did the pilot with those 3 districts early on. I think it was in November, and they have continued. Right now, Central Falls still administers the test. So does Providence, and many of our districts right now, if not most of them, all of them are actually administering the rapid test in the schools. So we just administered, we did the pilot there to see what would be the mechanics. What would it take? How long would it take? How would we put it together? But all our schools are engaged in testing at this point.
So the schools, all the schools are engaged in self-testing. Is this
Yes.
A self-swab? Exactly how is the test administered, physically
It
administered?
depends. It depends. So in some schools, the nurses do it, or somebody on staff does it. The kids can self-swab. If you go now to like the Duncan Center, they let you self-swab. So it's the same test. It takes 15 minutes and you know the results right away.
And has there been any training provided to the schools with the regards to handling medical waste or biohazards?
Absolutely. That's what the EDOC has done. I mentioned them earlier. So they do constant training. They're also there to provide support, real-time support. So that was why we did the pilot, was to get what all the procedures would be so that we could guide school districts.
Do you have any idea what the additional cost has been to the various municipalities because of taking on this school-administered self-testing?
Yeah, it's free. It's been paid for by FEMA.
Oh, and FEMA will continue to pay for it?
As of
or-
right now, yes, that's what we're hearing. We have not heard anything to the contrary.
Now, what about the change of working conditions to our maintenance personnel? So they've also been trained on handling medical waste, is that correct?
The EDOC has worked with the districts to provide the training that they need at each district level.
And is it just the maintenance personnel and the nurses that are engaged in the handling of this medical waste?
Well, these are just the BINEX tests. So every district does it a little differently. They follow the procedures, the guidelines that they have, but it's all very different.
Has there been a change to the terms for working with this type of material? Are we looking at increasing the salaries for the people that are handling this medical waste?
I don't know if that's happening, and that would happen by district. I don't know if that's taking place.
So
It's part of their CBAs.
Since we're in the second year of the pandemic, has there been any movement from Rhode to help identify essential employees or make recommendations to the school district statewide as to who should be considered essential employees?
No, that's not something that we would do during a pandemic. That would be something that probably the Department of Health would do.
Okay. And then the very last question that I have goes back to what my brother had originally started talking to you about, excuse me, with regards to the diversity of the charter schools. Excuse me. So you had said that the schools conduct a blind lottery. And so my question is, we're aware of the medically fragile students who are in the various school districts in our municipalities, along with those individuals who have educational challenges, learning disabilities, or additional challenges with regards to behavioral, disciplinary students. Are these children also part of the blind lottery?
They are part of the blind lottery, yes.
So does Rhode keep a list of the diversity of each of the charter schools? The students, not the faculty, the students?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So I would like to know if you could provide that information to this committee, please, so we could really get a sense of what the diversity of the charter schools looks like.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Representative Barrows, for taking the hearing while I took a small break. We're going to go on to a different line of questioning, but just let's wrap this charter school discussion up. When we talk about a blind lottery, Commissioner, we're actually talking about a application lottery, correct?
Yes.
All right, so that's not a universal blind lottery, and that could explain why many of the students that Representative Wilkerson is speaking about are not in these charter schools. And that's most likely because those parents decide not to fill out an application for the charters because they believe the traditional public schools serve their children well. So I think that's fair, and I think that leads back to Representative O'Brien's question, who was talking about the costs that the traditional districts bear for those students that the charters do not. And I think when we start talking about blind lotteries, we have to be very clear that we're talking about an application process. And there are bills pending in the General Assembly that would create an actual blind lottery. And I know you support that. We've had that discussion before.
Yes.
And I know that many of the charter schools support that. So we'll wrap the discussion up on charter schools and we'll move to some of the other things in the budget. But, you know, when I was coming back, I heard the discussion about, 10% of the total money going to the charters, and we had to look at it holistically, not just as a singular number. Well, if 6% of the kids are in the charters and 10% of the money's going to the charters, then we have a disparity there. And it's not, to be fair to you, Commissioner, I want to make sure we're very fair to you. It is not your job to determine the funding formula for public schools in Rhode Island. That's our job. And we take that job seriously, and we don't expect you to create a funding formula and do our job. But we do need to get it out there in the public that there is a funding formula discrepancy. And many of my colleagues have been painted as less than supportive of brown and black students because of their support for fixing that funding formula. And that is unfair. We had a discussion about unfair. That is unfair. I've spent my entire career teaching in a diverse district. All of God's children come before me, and I'm proud of that. And many of my colleagues who have been painted in this light are upset that they have, because they're looking for a policy solution that, again, is not your responsibility. It is our responsibility. And I think that's where this discussion stems from. So I would agree with you that we should not be pitting one against the other. And I'll leave that as a comment. I don't expect you to respond. And let's move it and see if we can't get Kelvin back or someone to answer questions that are non-charter related. Like, how are we doing on the implementation of the education reforms that were implemented by the General Assembly 2 years ago?
Which in particular would you?
I'll give you the list. So if you refer to Liza's presentation, it would be slide 60, and then I think slide 61, that go through the list of the legislative reforms from 2019. Academic standards, curriculum frameworks, school-based management, which you mentioned, the duties of school improvement teams, the fast track of the aspiring principals,
Yep.
and the accountability. And I know you started to speak about that.
Yep.
And I really want to have that discussion because I think
Sure.
that's important. And I know it goes to your request for these FTEs.
Sure. So why don't we talk, Anna, why don't you kick us off with the standards and what we're doing with the fast tracking? That will help us understand. We're really excited because we have met all the expectations in many of these areas, even before the deadline that was requested. So Anna, can you take us away?
Yes, so we do have the certification for fast track principal is already in place. We're working with districts who want to use that pathway. We have submitted the standards revision for both math and ELA have been approved by the council. We're now working on the frameworks, which according to the legislation should be ready by September. We are on target to be ready before that time frame, as the commissioner mentioned. All of our high quality curriculum work is launched. All those high quality curriculum materials were posted 6 months ahead of time. We're working with districts to both purchase and to do the implementation. So in terms of the curriculum and the frameworks, we are on target to meet all of the legislation. So I will pass it to Kelvin for site-based management.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, Kelvin.
Great,
Thank you.
Representative, thank you for the question. As it relates to the other elements of the accountability law, number one, I'll start out with the portion related to accountability for districts. Last November, we met with every district in the state and we laid out the extension of the current accountability system and extended the star rating system to all districts across the state. Every district is aware of the timeline associated with what that would look like. And as it relates to how we are going to launch that, right now we're having discussions as it relates to RICAS and the impact associated with that accountability system. So we're very well much so on schedule in relationship to that. In addition to that, I would like to add that part of the legislation calls for a strategic planning system to support districts associated with that. The agency has invested through grant dollars, federal grant dollars, in a system that will allow us to essentially launch that strategic planning system. And we're currently working with 13 districts across the state to pilot what that would look like so that we're in a good place, again, to launch that this fall in according to the timeline that is articulated in the law. I'd also like to lastly mention the site-based management element of the law. And so recently, in the last 2 months, in fact, we just released the guidance to all districts associated with site-based management. And we're currently in the process of developing modules that will support districts in the training necessary for all of the school improvement teams in order to help support districts across the state in that management and that shift. Every single one of those elements have been presented and vetted with districts. So in other words, the release of the guidance as well as the modules have been done in support and input from districts to ensure that we have alignment and speaking to the operational capacity necessary to implement the law with fidelity.
Thank you, Kelvin, and thank you all for the work toward implementation. I know that was incredibly important to the General Assembly at the time of passage, and I know through my discussions with you all that you have been working on that and in constant communication with myself and Representative McNamara, and that is appreciated. Are there any other questions from the committee? I just want to touch on one thing. I thought I heard a discussion of the discretionary funds that would be available to RIDE, to the commissioner, in regard to the federal funding. Would it be possible to use those funds to create a scholarship certification program for ESL certification or English to speakers of other languages certification? I know that in Providence, there's an effort to get teachers certified, and I know there's been some controversy around that. Is it possible to use that funding for an effort like that so that we can perhaps run those courses in collaboration with a college or university, or run them through the districts or RIDE so that we can, get more of our classroom teachers certified?
I wish, but we can't. But we applied for a grant with the federal government that would help us do that. But this money can't be used. That money that the ESSER is really going to be to use for the LEAP, for the initiatives and the summer school. But no, we can't use it any other way. We would wish that we could.
So is that restricted in the regulations that you can only use it for those two aspects?
Yes, so it's really for the COVID direct impact. So student direct impact, so that it goes in the classroom, so that it is for direct services, most of it.
Well, I think we could probably make the argument that what I just presented is direct impact, and I would. I would look into something like that, because I think that initiative is really important, and I appreciate the work that's been done to that end, and I just think it's something we need to talk about more broadly, because, as you know, educators have only so much time in the day and only so many resources to pay for their own certification. I know many of them want to do this, so that's just some food for thought.
I would love that, and if you guys can help us with that, we would really appreciate
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
because this is a big initiative for us, and we really are committed to doing this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thank you for that. So seeing no other questions, we appreciate your appearance here before us today, Commissioner, and your constant communication with us. And I'm sure we will be sending follow-ups to you, and we have taken your recommendations seriously. We continue to analyze the budget proposal and look toward improving the department's ability to do its job in transforming into an agency that is supporting districts and doing the work so that all of our kids, charters and traditional public school students, have the best possible education. So thank you and your team, Deputy Commissioner Kevin Rodon and Deputy Commissioner Riley. We appreciate your input tonight as well. So thank you.
Thank you all. We really appreciate your support and work. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to those folks that are signed up to testify, and we really appreciate your patience. This has been a long hearing, and I know that those signed up to testify by phone are signed up to testify on a myriad of issues. So we're going to first go to Linda Katz from the Economic Progress Institute and Workforce Alliance. Linda? You're on with the House Finance Subcommittee on Education, Linda.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. You've had a very long afternoon and evening. I'm going to be very quick. I submitted written testimony. My name's Linda Katz, Policy Director at the Economic Progress Institute, and my testimony is on behalf of the Rhode Island Workforce Alliance. What we wanted to sort of lift up for the committee is part of the Department of Education budget that often doesn't get a lot of attention, and that's the adult education work that is part of the department's charge under the laws. And that system is sort of, I listened to the President Hughes talk about CCRI and to the Commissioner talk about the K-12 system. And the adult education system, which is 20 organizations, sort of is the middle of those two systems. It serves to help ensure that all Rhode Islanders have the foundational skills that they need to succeed in the workforce, including English language skills, literacy, numeracy, and more, and as with rising importance, digital literacy. There are about 68,000 working age adults who lack a high school credential in our state, and 31,200 adults who do not speak English well or at all. And this critical part of both our workforce development system and our educational system, the adult education programs, are the place that people go to get those basic skills so that they can either move into jobs right away or move on to post-secondary education. And that's for new people coming to our state, as well as those who may not have succeeded to get the skills they need as our K-12 system is getting up to snuff. The system serves about 6,000 to 8,000 adults each year, and even during the pandemic, those 20 programs pivoted to online learning and served about 5,000 students. So 2 points. One is that the funding for the adult education system has sort of been frozen at $9 million for the past couple of years. We think that should be looked at so that we can end waiting lists that have grown, especially for adults who are looking for English language services. And there are a lot of innovative ways that the programs are providing those services. And the second issue is that the programs really need the administrative support at Rhode. There used to be 3 FTEs at Rhode that were involved in ensuring that we had a high-quality adult education system. It's currently 1 full-time person with a half-time person to be hired. And given the challenges that face the adults, the need to make sure that the systems are high quality, that we meet federal regulations, and to help provide pathways to people as the economy recovers, and especially those who are persons of color who have been hard hit, as well as English language learners. We hope that the committee can delve a little bit further into the adult education part of the K-12 system and perhaps look to both beef up the FTEs as well as the funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Any members of the committee have questions for Linda? Linda, thank you for your testimony. It's appreciated.
Okay, thanks. Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Next, we have James Parisi from the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals. Jim, you are on with the House Finance Subcommittee on Education.
Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you and your committee for all the work you do in crafting a state budget for our state. The Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals urges the committee to increase general revenue funding for Rhode Island College by the $5.9 million amount that President Sanchez spoke to you about earlier this afternoon. We represent three different groups of workers at RIC, the faculty, the professional staff, and the adjunct faculty, and on their collective behalf, we urge you to increase state funding. My members have witnessed firsthand RIC operating under an austerity budget. And just to quantify a few items, the adjunct faculty have been severely curtailed over the last couple of years. As a measure of faculty load hours, where a 3-credit course is 3 hours and a 4-credit 4 hours, the faculty load work for adjuncts has declined 21% over the last 2 years, from 2018 to 2020, and the total number of adjunct faculty have declined by 76 over the last 2 years, from 419 to 343. Our professional staff bargaining unit had 7 layoffs the end of last calendar year, including some positions in the laboratories, data management, and construction program, and we have 3 pending this year tied to the additional 20 layoffs that our faculty are going to see when RIC jobs at the Henry Barnard School end, the state jobs end, as it transitions to a new school that's going to be part of the Providence Country Day School. And finally, as part of the austerity measures, some of my members working under a negotiated contract did defer some raises, as the president had mentioned earlier. So why increase state funding for RIC? You know, number one, to save jobs. And clearly it's not going to save or bring back all the jobs that have recently been lost, but it will preserve jobs and maybe will permit some people getting rehired, and we do need to hire more folks at RIC. So that's an important reason to do so, and we certainly want the state to fund the contract. And you're going to hear a little more testimony, and there's a written statement from Professor Christensen about the issue, but the RIC faculty were traditionally underpaid compared to their peers. They negotiated a new contract raising pay. The state supported it, but when the governor put in a budget proposal the last couple of years, there was no money to support the negotiated pay increase. So we need additional state money for that. But it's not just for the workers. The students are also harmed by the low rate of state funding. And one reason to increase state funding is to prevent future tuition hikes. Because of the low state funding, tuition rates this year are increasing 5%, a number much greater than the rate of inflation. And the hike's actually almost 6% if you include mandatory fees. And there's some written information from Professor Brolinger on that issue. And finally, increasing state funding will be a direct way that the General Assembly can address the student debt crisis. Before COVID, student loan debt was the most discussed emerging national crisis. That crisis did not disappear with this pandemic. It's still there. If you value lowering student loan debt, increase state funding for RIC. Rhode Island ranks the 6th highest in student debt per borrower in the country at $36,121. I appreciate your attention to my testimony. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to try and answer them.
Are there any questions for Jim from the committee? Seeing none. Jim, thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, we have Thomas Schmeling, Rhode Island College American Federation of Teachers, Committee on Political Education. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman Amore, and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify today with regard to the higher education budget as it affects Rhode Island College. As said, I'm Tom Schmeling. I'm chair of the political science, chair of the Rhode Island AFT Committee on Political Education at RIC, and I'm a member of the political science faculty. And I'm here today to urge you to increase the fiscal year 22 general appropriation proposed in the governor's budget by the $5.9 million to meet the college's request. The funding is essential if RIC is to continue to meet its contractual obligations, to avoid further layoffs, and begin to fill the vacancies in faculty and staff that were created by the recent budget shortfalls. and to continue to provide Rhode Islanders with access to an affordable, high-quality four-year college degree. The lower level of funding in the budget will force RIC to again increase tuition to compensate. In the year 2000, legislative appropriations covered 60% of the cost of a RIC education, while tuition covered 40%. Today, as you heard earlier in testimony, those numbers are reversed, and students bear 60% of the cost, with the state picking up only 40% of the cost. And the consequence of this is that a college education is increasingly out of reach for Rhode Islanders, especially those first-generation college students the RIC has traditionally served. Many people may not know that Rhode Island currently ranks near the bottom of states in terms of its support for public higher education. According to the most recent report from the State Higher Education Officers Organization, Rhode Island is 47th in the percent of revenue allocated to higher education and 45th in public education support per capita. Without adequately funding public higher education, Rhode Islanders cannot compete in a national economy where more and more jobs require a college degree. So I urge you to provide Rhode Island College with an appropriation that is adequate for us faculty to do our job of educating Rhode Islanders for a 21st century economy. And I thank you for your time.
Tom, thank you very much for your testimony, and thank you for your constant communication with this committee. You represent the faculty members extremely well. We are appreciative of that communication, and we hope it continues.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, next we're going to go to Paige Clausius-Parks from Rhode Island Kids Count. Paige, you're on with House Finance Subcommittee on Education.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Paige Clausius-Parks, Senior Policy Analyst at Rhode Island Kids Count. I have submitted written testimony, so I will keep my comments brief and just share a few highlights. We would like to voice our strong support for several key elements of the budget for Department of Education. First, we're very pleased to see that the governor has proposed fully funding year 11 of the education funding formula. Moving on to the Categorical Fund for multilingual learners. Multilingual students are an incredible asset to all of Rhode Island. However, research shows that we have much work to do to ensure that these students have what they need to succeed. My written testimony includes a chart that shows the large and unacceptable disparities in academic outcomes by language status. In 2019, only 20% of our third grade multilingual learners met expectations in reading. Only 11% of the third grade multilingual learners met expectations in math. So we support the proposed investment of $5 million for the Multilingual Categorical Fund. And we also acknowledge that even more funding and resources are needed to support the needs of multilingual learners. Moving on to the resources to teach mental and behavioral skills, my written testimony also includes data around the prevalence of mental health conditions, trauma, depression, suicidality, and stress among Rhode Island youth. I hope you take a moment to look at some of those data points. It's very striking and really important to note. Adverse childhood experiences, toxic stress, and trauma can be experienced by any child at any point in their life. This is why it's so important for our schools to be equipped to meet the mental health and emotional needs of our students. Not doing so can perpetuate existing traumas and introduce new traumas. So we support the governor's proposed investment in teacher training, curricula, and resources to teach mental health and behavioral skills. And we also urge the General Assembly to provide the funding needed to increase the number of mental health professionals in schools. Moving on to support for low-performing schools. Again, my written testimony includes a chart and data around the school performance classifications for the school year 2018-2019. And you also see that schools with a one-star rating are low-performing schools in multiple indicators. 7% of schools in Rhode Island were identified as in need of comprehensive support and improvement. 17 out of these 22 schools were located in the 4 core cities, which are Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, and Woonsocket. Because of this, we support the proposal to create a new position at Rhode to support these persistently low-performing schools. We also urge the funding for the dual and concurrent enrollment initiative and to continue funding for the child opportunity zones, because we know that these community schools are powerful equity strategies that have been successful in helping to address inequitable practices. So I'll conclude my testimony there. I'm happy to take any questions.
Paige, thank you very much. I do not believe there are any questions from the committee. We appreciate your testimony. Have a good evening.
Thank you. You too.
And next we have Shirley Francis Frazier. Shirley, you're on with the House Finance Subcommittee on Education. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I am Shirley Francis Frazier, a resident of Providence, Rhode Island, and a member of the Community Advisory Board of Hope High School. This school has 90% students who are disadvantaged. Many are students of color, and I was delighted to learn that the Providence during the commissioner's testimony that we are headed to a new and better system of education, and I would look forward to learning and hearing articulated the particulars of that system and where the black and brown students, particularly those identified in the Johns Hopkins report, in need of lifting, who do not read and do math proficiently, where they will fit into that system and how the system will benefit them. I was also delighted to hear that there's $65 million set aside to assist students, people who have been impacted by COVID and the pandemic, because in our community, there are black and brown students who are homeless. One student was highlighted yesterday in the WPRI's report as homeless and in need of funding. And when he accessed his teachers and the principals and the leaders in his school, he was not able to access Title I funding. They had to set up a GoFundMe page. And so I'm just wondering, even before the pandemic, my CAB colleagues and I were wondering, what is the application process so that students in need of homeless funding provided by Title I and students who are now affected by the COVID who need to recover, what is that application process so that they can access the fundings that the Recovery Act has provided to get their social emotional needs met, to have the food insufficiency need met. We're graduating seniors who still are not reading proficiently, how they can be assisted so that they can transition to a new life and possibly into CCRI or some other program that can help them to access their career goals and transition so they won't be left behind, so that adult literacy can be they can achieve the math and reading proficiency that they need for the rest of their lives. And those are some of the questions. So as we move forward, we just look forward to hearing the particulars of the programs to lift these students, and we look forward to hearing publicly the application process to get the students the $65 million that they need for their recovery, and not have those funds sanctioned for things like providing for MLL certifications, but getting the dollars actually to the students and the black and brown students they're intended for. Thank you very much.
Shirley, I saw that report on WPRI in regard to the homeless student, and we're going to follow up with the commissioner on that application process to ensure that there is a information system that goes into the districts, and so they can serve those students as well as they can. So we appreciate your testimony. Thank you.
And thank you so much. Yes, because this has been a really this has been an ongoing problem even before the pandemic, And it's particularly acute now at Hope High School. We're blessed to have administrators there who even have worked out of their pockets in helping these students, but it's unnecessary when you have the Title I dollars available. So thank you very much for following up.
Thank you, Shirley. Have a good night.
You too.
That concludes the business of the Finance Committee Subcommittee on Education. Have a good evening.